Alrighty. Well, I will go ahead and get started. Just for everyone's knowledge and awareness, this is being recorded. So once we get it approved, Lauren on our team will be sending out for anybody that may not be able to stay for the whole presentation or who wants to come back and see it again. You can always visit our website, infinitalkskc.com. All of our previous InfiniTALKS series are also on there. So feel free to scroll through there and see what the availability is there. But thank you for joining us today. My name is Sam DeSetti. I'm also here with Jack Evans and Susan Geiersbach. We're all financial advisors here at InfiniTALKS. Today, our InfiniTALKS series is financial planning in your 20s and 30s. Helping you navigate kind of their finances through really two very important decades. I think we'd all agree. These 2 decades are really filled with big decisions, starting careers, buying homes, starting families, and all that kind of comes with some major debt implications too, right? Our goal today is to kind of equip you with practical strategies, understanding of the best ways to navigate these situations, and whether it's investing for retirement, if it's starting family, managing credit, we're going to put you in a very good position to be able to be covered with a lot of information and tools. The agenda today, fundamentals of investments. Susan is going to help us talk through planning for some of these major life milestones. And as well, Jack's going to finish us off with some smart strategies for debt and credit health. So fundamentals of investing, let's get right into it. Let's lay the groundwork for 2 really common types of accounts we may see, whether we're starting in an industry where we have a 401k available to us or an IRA. Both of these are just types of retirement accounts. An IRA stands for an individual retirement account. So you may be someone who's starting in a career. You may have a 401k. I like to call it just a employer-sponsored IRA. If you're an individual who does not have a 401k available to them through their employer to save for your retirement, people can start utilizing an IRA for your individual self. So let's kind of dive in here and kind of speak on the differences between the two. Who can open an IRA? That is anybody with earned income. You pay your taxes on these dollars that you get through W-2 or 1099. The employee contributions that you can put into an individual retirement account is $7,000. Okay. Once you're the age of 50, which I don't think anybody here is today, right? You can start contributing an additional $1,000 as a catch-up contribution. There is no total contribution limit. We're not including the employers. This is completely by yourself. The tax treatment on this, and we're going to get to this in the next slide. There's 2 ways to contribute. A lot of you may have heard of a Roth IRA. That is just one way to contribute to an IRA account. So pre-tax, we're going to be deferring tax. Roth, we're going to be paying the tax today, and we'll get to that a little bit more in a minute. Within the investment options you have capable, it's very broad. Truly, it's up to you, the one who's selecting the investment for yourself, or if you have an advisor, they're the ones that are going to be dictating what funds go into a portfolio for yourself, but it's also up just to the institutions that you're using as well. There is no employer match. Again, this is individual, but one thing to be very aware of when it comes to retirement accounts is what's called an RMD, or a required minimum distribution. At some point, that is when the federal government says, hey, you've been taxing all these deferred dollars if you're saving pre-tax in a traditional IRA. At some point, we are going to have to pay those taxes. In today's current tax law, that begins at age 73, where the IRS will start forcing you to take out distributions out of these IRAs if you have still deferred those taxes. Now, again, these are retirement accounts, which we're focusing on here. There's a reason, we have an early withdrawal penalty. Federal government long time ago understood that if we just have savings accounts, right, it's easy to say, oh, I need a few dollars from the savings account, right? Well, let's kind of put some guardrails on what our retirement accounts are meant to be for, right? This is not for, saving for a down payment. This is not for buying a car. This is not for, our 20s or 30s or 40s. These accounts are truly for the benefit of us in retirement to continue to prolong and have income for us when we're no longer working. All right, so there is an early withdrawal penalty for an IRA of 10% if you try to withdraw money before the age of 59 and a half, and that's excluding taxes. If you've been saving pre-tax and you're trying to take it out, you also have to include the tax payment on that as well. All right, comparing IRA to a 401k, and a 401k, again, is an employer-sponsored IRA. It isn't offered through an employer as an incentive for the employees to save. Now, there's a few benefits to a 401k if you have one available to you. One of those is an increased contribution limit available to you. The employee contribution for 2025 is $23,500. There's additional catch-up if you're over the age 50 of $7,500. So there's an increased limit there. Now, there's a total contribution limit as a whole, so not just the employee yourself, but the employer of $70,000. Okay. The tax treatment is the same for both of these accounts. There's two ways to be able to contribute: pre-tax and Roth. It's eligible up to the plan provisions. Most plans these days are mandated to require Roth contribution ability, but again, we'll get to that on the next slide here. The investment options are a little bit more limited compared to an IRA. The investment options are going to be truly lent up to the committee, the investment committee at your employer level, but also the institution, or what we call your record keeper. A record keeper is going to be the administrator of your 401k plan. Think of them as the bank where they hold the transactions, they hold your balances, they connect through payroll. It is limited to the institution and what the employer chooses there. The employer match is a huge reason why people often use the 401k over an IRA. It is saying, hey, me as a company, if you're working for me, I will give you money. We call it free money as an incentive for you to save. So for an example, an employer might say, hey, Susan, if you would save 4% of your income, well, as an incentive and benefit of you saving, I will also give you 4%. So 4 from myself, 4 from the company into my 401k for an 8% total contribution. So double what you may put up. So that's just an example that's often given, but it's incentive for the employees to save as well. The required minimum distributions are also a factor when it comes to the 401k. Again, it is dependent upon whether you put in pre-tax, you're deferring those taxes, or if you're doing Roth, but this is consistent across the board. And as well, early withdrawal penalty of 10% if you try to take a distribution before the age of 59 and a half. Now, contribution sources, there's 3 main contribution ways, but 2 specifically to retirement accounts. For retirement accounts specifically, Roth, our contributions are going to be made after taxes are already been paid. So if I'm saving Roth, I may be a younger person who I want have a long time frame till retirement. I want tax-free earnings for that period. So I pay taxes today. My taxes are my contributions are going to grow tax-free, but my distributions that I take, likely in retirement, are also going to be tax-free. So pay the tax once and it grows tax-free forever. On the flip side, maybe you're a person who's in their working career where you're in a higher income bracket, you're paying your fair share of taxes. Well, it may be a good decision to contribute and get a tax deferment on those dollars via pre-tax. So pre-tax, you're going to contribute, before taxes have already been taken out. So we actually get a deduction for contributing to a 401k plan via pre-tax or traditional IRA. So likely in retirement, when you start withdrawing those assets, you will have to pay taxes at your ordinary income rate in retirement. So again, maybe you're a person who has a high earning income right now. You have some time frame until retirement, but likely your income is going to be substantially lower in retirement. Well, it may be good to pay at the 12% tax bracket instead of the 24 or 32% today. Okay. Third option is in regards to something that is outside the norm of a retirement account. So some retirement accounts will also have an after-tax savings or taxable account. Where you're going to see taxable savings the most is with institutions, Fidelity, institution like ours, InfiniTALKS, what we call a glorified savings account. So contributions are going to be made with after-tax dollars, maybe just excess money coming through our paychecks. But when you go to sell one of your stocks, bonds, ETFs, you're going to be paying taxes on the dividends, the interest, or capital gains when these assets are sold. So let's give an example. Maybe I put $1,000 into Apple stock, and that grows to $2,000. Well, I only have to pay the taxes on the $1,000 of growth I see there. So there is no penalty. So it's different from a retirement account. It's actually a good way of goals-based savings. If I'm trying to save up for a down payment for a home or for a car, and I want a short-term goal of saving, a taxable account may be a good decision for you. Now, Roth and pre-tax is very specific on you yourself. I often say, there's no right or wrong answer between choosing, hey, is pre-tax better for me or is Roth better for me? But here's a few good examples of whether you're a good candidate for a Roth 401k. So maybe you're a person who expects to be in a higher tax bracket when they're going to retire. Maybe you're going to just continue to work longer than the average. Maybe you have passive income in retirement. You expect a larger inheritance in retirement. You have some sort of expectation of higher earnings. Well, getting a Roth in now with our current tax law, I can't tell you what the tax law is set to be 10, 15, 20 years from now. If anyone does tell you, they're probably lying, okay? But being able to understand our tax brackets where they are today and understanding where our future earnings might be may be a good decision on utilizing Roth today. If you're a younger employee, if you're someone who has a long time horizon until retirement, the beauty of Roth 401k or Roth IRA is getting that long-term compounding tax-free growth available to you. If you're a highly compensated employee, there are phase-out limits for a Roth IRA. So at some point, the IRS will tell you, you're no longer eligible to contribute to a Roth IRA. Well, for a 401k, there are no phase-out limits to utilizing a Roth 401k. So if you are a highly compensated employee, you're not eligible for a Roth IRA, it may be a good time to consider, hey, should I start using Roth inside of my 401k? Should I maybe even start splitting my contribution? Get tax-deferred growth, but also get some tax-free growth because I'm not eligible for a Roth IRA. Lastly, if you're a person who, down the road, you start building a family and you want to start leaving or planning, as we call legacy planning, leaving tax-free money to their heirs, especially if, your kids follow suit and are in higher tax brackets and have a stretch rule of 10 years where they have to take out this money. The best way to do that is leaving tax-free dollars to your heirs and children. Few points on, why, today is so important, why you'll hear so many people, you'll hear parents even say this, or, your older colleagues at work say, hey, just start saving. I hear it all the time. If you just, tell somebody young, I would tell them, just start saving something, right? I have a little chart here showing my two colleagues today, Susan and Jack. We're going to walk through this demonstration, but what we're seeing here is Susan and Jack, they're both going to start their working career at age 30. Okay. Susan is going to start out by contributing for a 10-year period, $4,000 a year for 10 years. So her total contribution or her total invested amount is going to be $40,000. We're going to assume a 7% annualized rate of return for the next 25, 35 years until their age 65 date of retirement. Now, Jack, on the other hand here, is starting a family, may have kids, may have student loans. We can all come up with different types of things that are going on in our lives that may say, maybe now's not the best time to start saving for my retirement. Jack's going to say, I'm going to wait. I'm going to start saving when I'm 40. Okay, so Jack at age 40, has missed the last 10 years of not saving, but he says, I'm going to save $4,000 a year for the rest of my career. Okay, so Susan put in a total of $40,000. Jack put $104,000. And you can see by the total contribution values, Susan still comes out with more at $343,000 just by saving early. Okay, comparatively, Jack still has a great balance, still has a great retirement account that he can live on, but he's never going to be able to catch up, even though he saved over double what Susan was able to do just in that 10-year period. So it's not always just about, hey, how much can I save? It is, how long can I be in the market? Even if it's just saying, hey, I can only put in 1% into my IRA, my 401k. I can only do 1 or 2. It's compounding growth year after year after year. Now, I like to show my participants, my clients, just the power of 1%. So we have 2 examples here of Smart John and Smarter John. Both understand that, hey, it's really important to save in our retirement accounts, but what's going to happen if I start to save more? So we're going to assume John has an annual salary of $50,000, and we're going to get a 4% rate of return on that. So Smart John at age 40, he's saving $2%, which is $1,000. He's just going to say, you know what, 2% is good for me. Each year I'm just going to continue to do 2%, and by the time I'm age 65, John's going to have $55,975, so just shy about $56,000. Now, Smarter John, on the other hand, understands the importance of inflation. He understands the importance of just as maybe my kids are getting out of the house, that I have more excess income, or my salary is growing each year. I should probably start putting away a little bit more as these things happen in life. So Smarter John is going to do his 2%, still do his $1,000, but each year, until he gets to 10%, he's going to start increasing 1% each year. So he's going to start at 2, next year he'll do 3, year after that 4, all the way up to 10. And what shows after saving and after 25 years after that, he's going to over quadruple his money at $223,000, just periodically, one step at a time, trying to save more over time. So an extra $167,000 for John's retirement. So keep his boat floating, not let the waves crash in with volatility that we may see in the market, but have that income source available for him and his family for his future. All right. I want to get into just, one couple key rules that us as advisors like to tell our participants, like to tell our clients. And one is, don't try to time the market. Sometimes we advisors here, when should I buy and when should I sell a certain security, or when is it a good time to get into the market? If someone has a crystal ball in this group, I would love to continue to talk with you further, but I will tell you, nobody has that crystal ball. What we're looking at here is the S&P 500 returns by decade back to 1930s. So if we're in the S&P 500 and we just rode the wave up and down over the long course of time, that account would be up 27,000%. I would say that's pretty great. Now, I'll jump over to the right to show the one reason why, hey, if we were able to exclude the 10 worst days per decade, we could be up 6 million%, and that's my crystal ball, right? But let's show the other side of the dramatic scenario to say, well, what if you're somebody who we have volatility in the markets, we feel that we don't like our accounts going down, so we sell out of our securities. Well, if we miss and if we exclude the 10 best days in the market per decade, we're only up 99% over the last 100 years. So while we think, hey, we can, I understand how to time the market, I understand how this works, missing these important days, missing, April 9th after the tariff news came out, one of the single largest days we've seen in the markets, these have drastic effects over our lifetime, over the long term of our overall portfolio and our overall timing. So just missing a few days can be very detrimental. All right. Now, a couple off that, we'll say, make sure you're meeting with your advisor. Make sure you're meeting to understand your plan and stick to that plan. We like to say, hey, in a comfortable period, how do we feel? What type of allocation do you feel is best suited for you in a comfortable environment market-wise, right? Understanding when market volatility does come into play, we can always fall back to our values, okay? So in this example, in this slide here, we're showing the S&P 500 annual returns with the largest intra-year downturns. If anyone isn't aware of the average downturn in a year over the last 100 years, it is 16.5%, the average across the board here. At some point, we see, as the gray dots show us, at some point the market's going to go down. But it is what we do during those periods that have an effect on our overall portfolio. So we can see so far year to date on the farthest right, as of 2025, this is backdated a couple days, but it's so far, we've been down 19% at one point. Since then, we've had a market rebound about 21 to 25%, back up into positive territory. But across the board, we see market volatility. We can expect it each year, but it's what we do during those time periods that makes a dramatic effect on our portfolio. Something I always like to tell my participants is it's kind of like going to the grocery store, right? Especially when it comes to a 401k plan, right? Our contributions are always going in on a periodic basis per payroll, right? So if we're going to the grocery store and my contribution to my 401k is $100, well, I'm taking $100 to the grocery store each week. And if the price of bread, the price of gas, the price of steak, the price of eggs goes down, whatever it may be, well, we're buying more of that every time we buy that $100 worth. So not only do we see the rebound, but we're lowering what we call our cost basis and getting the fluctuation, getting the rebound on top of what we already have. So it is a beautiful system just to stick to your plan. All right. Odds of gain periods, especially for our younger group here today, this is looking at how often the S&P 500 was higher over various holding periods. So if we're looking at just a one day, none of us can expect to say, hey, whether tomorrow or the next day is going to be a positive day in the market or a down day in the market. But what we do know, as we increase our holdings period, as the time horizon of our retirement accounts are needed, we can expect a higher probability of the markets being up to where we're looking at 10 to 20 years of our holding period, 93 to 100% of the time, those are going to be up. Okay, this is especially important for younger people just to understand, hey, I have a long time horizon to retirement. Let's put the gas pedal to earn the most as we can to gear us ready to have control of our dollars for retirement. All right. Now, lastly, as we get older, we're going to have to make sure we're diversifying thoughtfully. Stocks and bonds are your two portions of your portfolio. Stocks are the accumulation portion. Bonds are more of our preservation. Okay? As we're younger, we want to accumulate. We want the stocks. We want the appreciated growth. But over time, we need to diversify to make sure we're protecting what we built. So this slide is showing stocks and bonds in the 12 downturns we've seen over the market over the last 50 years. 11 out of those 12 downturns, the bonds have outperformed stocks. So diversifying effectively when the equities are down, we provide that weighted blanket by our bonds to just continue to diversify, continue to keep our account balance intact for the long time horizon. I will pass it off to Susan. She's going to talk us through planning for major life milestones and continue us on. Susan?
All right. Thank you, Sam. So obviously your 20s and 30s, you start hitting some really big life milestones. You might buy a house, you might get married, have kids. A lot of the goals in life you've been dreaming of or envisioning for yourself, they start coming true in your 20s and 30s typically. And with that, there is a lot of financial decision making, which can be overwhelming, especially if some of these milestones happen all at once or one after the other. Just to give you some background, I'm 33. I bought a house when I was 26. I got married in 2021, had a baby in 2022, and then again had another baby in 2024. So within 4 years, I got married and had 2 kids. And that was just what was going on in my personal life, not to mention all the changes that can happen professionally during that same time frame. So even those were all like amazing things, all things I wanted, it was still overwhelming at times. So let's get into it. One of the number one, biggest life milestones in your 20s and 30s, getting married. And what happens after you get married? Typically, you got to figure out, how are we going to combine finances? What's that going to look like for us? So you can do it a couple different ways. There's the traditional route where you get a joint account and you guys combine all your assets together, and that works for a lot of people. And I think the older generations, especially, that's typically what you see. For my husband and I, that's what we do. We just have a joint account, but we're very similar on money, so it works for us. On the flip side of that, you could have separate accounts. Just keep everything separate still, and that might help with money disagreements, arguments, any problems that may arise. Money is usually one of the top 3 reasons people get divorced. So if that is kind of a sore spot in someone's relationship, sometimes keeping separate accounts helps. I know for my in-laws personally, they have separate accounts because when they were younger, it was a pain point. So to avoid that and help with that, they just do separate accounts. And then there's the best of both worlds, which is hybrid. And I know several couples my age that do this, where they've got a joint account together that they both put money into, and that's for like shared expenses, mortgages, bills. But then they've got 2 separate accounts that they each have that they can use for their like fun accounts, where they can spend money without worrying about the other person judging them for what they're spending, or getting on their case about what they're spending, this and that. So that's a couple ways to do it. Sam, if we go to the next slide. It's important when you're discussing this, especially as you're merging your lives together financially, that you have to be transparent and honest. The biggest foundation of this is just communicating, making sure you talk to your partner about what your spending habits are, what your debts look like, income. And this is important, obviously, to talk about before even getting married and committing to each other. Because a lot of times, if you don't know that going in, it can only be, it only gets harder, once you're married and trying to navigate that. So it's good to just kind of talk through that before you get married. And then we often recommend just, talking through kind of your spending boundaries. You may not agree on everything, but have some sort of a framework you guys can agree on. And this is especially important if you do a joint account. It's a little different if you guys decide to do, separate accounts, but you'll still want to have those conversations to just kind of get an idea of what the other person, how they think about it. And then lastly, we recommend just scheduling monthly check-ins. This can be quarterly too if you don't want to do it monthly. I know for myself, my husband and I have kind of like a loose budget where I track it each month, but we're not nickel and diming necessarily following. We just are kind of trying to see, okay, this month last month we did better on not eating out as much, but our grocery bill was higher. But that's okay because we're okay with the grocery bill being higher. So just kind of checking in on things like that with one another as you're talking about money and bringing your finances together. And then also, along talking about money and how you're going to do expenses, is just working on shared life goals. So each of you may want, different things in life, and you have to figure out jointly what's important to both of you and what you want to make sure that other person gets if that's not a shared goal. And then building a budget for hitting some of those shared goals. And we do this a lot with clients where they come in and we learn about, their wildest dreams and desires, and okay, well, how can we get you there? Let's make a plan and a roadmap and put that in place to accomplish some of these goals. And then the last thing is just decide on a cost sharing method. So if you are going to do a joint account or a hybrid account, a lot of people usually do this equally where you both put in the same amount. But sometimes you'll see that if one person makes disproportionately more than the other person, you may want to do it by income and say, okay, you put in 60, I'll put in 40. If that works for you, great. It just kind of has to be, again, what you and your partner agree on and communicate about, and that way you're both on the same page. And then lastly, kind of on just merging finances, we kind of recommend three essential bank accounts. So we recommend a spending account. That would be like your day-to-day discretionary purchases. So this is more like your fun spending account, I would call it. And then the savings account, this would be dedicated towards building just like a financial reserve, like an emergency fund. And it also helps kind of build good saving habits. If you have no monthly, okay, I'm saving this amount, I can't touch this. And then lastly, we recommend an expense account where you could put kind of the boring bills, as I would call them, where you know you have to pay them to keep the lights on and things like that. But then you have it separate, like, okay, I've got my expenses taken care of, I've saved a little towards myself, and what's left in that spending account, you can spend, and then you don't feel guilty about getting that extra cup of coffee or going to a concert or something. You know, you're not worrying because you know I took care of the first two accounts. And then let's see. Oh, lastly, just kind of a budgeting technique. We have a lot of people, especially younger people, ask us about, well, how do I make a budget for myself? And the easiest first way to get started with this is just going to your bank account online and printing out the last, month of transactions. And you can see here we've got different colors. So, and you could do this online too. You don't have to, you could highlight these on a PDF, but just take a highlighter and say, all right, maybe green is going to be like the boring bills, like the energy and the mortgage. And then maybe yellow, like for myself personally, we've got a budget for eating out, like I said. So yellow is going to be all the restaurants or fast food we went to last month to track that. And then maybe red is more like entertainment. So hey, our Netflix subscription, or my husband loves to buy movies on this app called Vudu. He's got how much did he spend on movies this month? That kind of thing. Just break it down into categories that work for you. I've got probably like 8 different colored highlight ones because I'm really into like the highlighting of different categories, but you can also make it much simpler and it just be fixed versus variable expenses. It's just really kind of however you want to track it. I just like a little more detail when I'm looking through ours personally.
Susan, I'll chime in and add too. I think
Yeah, go
in
ahead.
today's world, it's gotten really easy just to even just tap, right, a piece of plastic, right? It gets really easy
Yes.
just to, swipe, tap, double click these days. Actually, just visually for myself that I've done this, actually visually seeing, hey, here's what I spent my money on this year. It kind of visually, Zach, who some people may have met, my oldest brother, who's an advisor here, he'd say I spend too much money on coffee, right? So visually seeing that, you can kind of disseminate the red colors and kind of come down to a number of dollars that I'm spending too much money on, and can I quantify that into maybe a savings bucket, that I can start building up for budgeting purposes.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, Sam. Thank you for adding that. That's definitely something I look at too when I look at this. I'm a Diet Coke drinker and not coffee in the morning, but I realize I'm like, wow, I spend way too much money on McDonald's Diet Cokes every week. So how could I cut this down? And then the next thing when you're getting married is, obviously you combine your finances and then how do you protect one another if something bad were to happen? So this isn't, the most fun topic to talk about, but it is important, and it's especially important as you start having children. So a couple of ways you can protect each other is updating your beneficiaries. So a beneficiary is someone who essentially inherits your accounts after you pass away. So you want to make sure on your retirement accounts, your 401k, if you have an IRA or a Roth, you're updating that to your spouse. If you have any life insurance, same thing, make them the beneficiary. And then bank accounts as well, you can add a payable on death, or POD is what they call it, just to make sure that seamlessly transitions to your spouse. If something were to happen to you, you don't have to get stuck in probate court, trying to get those assets and still live. And then another way to protect yourself is getting a power of attorney with your spouse. So that would be, there's a financial one and there's a healthcare one. And that would just be in case of an emergency. So if you were incapacitated and you couldn't make a financial decision for yourself or a healthcare decision for yourself, that allows your spouse to act in your capacity essentially while you're, in that situation. And then ideally you come out of it, of course, but those are used just as like really like worst case scenario. If you're still alive, but really something drastic's happened, you need someone to act on your behalf. And then finally, life insurance. Insurance in general, I think most people hate probably spending money on, because it's something you spend money on but you hope to never use, and especially life insurance, because if you use it, that means you passed away and something terrible happened. But it is important to consider because it really can help protect the people you love, especially your family. So on the next slide, I've got an example here of life insurance. This is a 30-year term quote, and what that means is it'll essentially protect you for 30 years. And on this one, I ran $1 million. So within 30 years, if something happens to you, your family is essentially protected for up to $1 million they'd receive after tax. Like no taxes are on that. It's $1 million in your pocket. And then how much does that cost? What does that look like? So you've got a couple different carriers here just to outline, some examples. And as you can see under this annual column, that ranges anywhere from like $575 a year to $600 a year. And on a monthly basis, it's around $50. So for $1 million life insurance policy to protect you for 30 years, it's only $50 a month. And when you think about it that way, that's way worth it. You'd spend, I think, 18,000 total, over the span of 30 years, which sounds like a lot of money, but that's worth the protection that if something were to happen and you lose your spouse's income, what are you going to do if you're counting on that second half of income? Having this windfall of money to make sure you're protected really can help your family. So that's just something we often see with younger people. We want them to consider, and that's usually something people implement when they are younger. And then the second major life milestone, I would call it, is buying a house, deciding to buy a house versus renting. So we ran through a scenario here where you've got a rental option, a 2-bedroom rental, and that's $2,100 a month. And then maybe a home that's 3 bedrooms is $300,000. You put down 10%, so your loan amount, your mortgage is $270,000. You have an interest rate of 7% right now. That's what they're at. Hopefully they go lower in the next couple of years. Then you have to consider you have property tax on a home, homeowners insurance, and then maintenance and repairs. It's almost inevitable that you buy a house and something go wrong the first year. Not anything drastic sometimes, but like I bought a house and within a year I think I had to replace the water heater. And of course you never think about that or budget for that until it happens, and you're like, oh no. And then the last thing just to consider is closing costs. Those are kind of the hidden costs in buying a house that you need to think about as well, and that goes towards the realtor and some other things. So if we looked at this kind of on like a monthly cost comparison, as you can see here, renting is $2,100 plus some renter's insurance is pretty cheap. So really all in, your monthly cost is about $2,100. Buying a house, there's a lot more expenses with it. So you've got, a cheaper mortgage up front, but then you add property tax, homeowners insurance, and then if we are budgeting for this maintenance and repairs, add another $250. Of course, it's not going to always happen monthly, but just as a ballpark. So then your monthly cost is around, almost $2,500 compared to $2,100. So why would you buy a home if it's more expensive, right, on a monthly basis? Because long term, over the a 5-year span. Sam, if we go to the next page, we've got a comparison here of renting versus buying. So longer term, over 5 years, you're going to spend about $135,000 on rent, and that's based on those numbers we just talked through. Not building any equity, obviously, since you don't own it, and your net cost is still $135,000. And your buying side, you're spending more up front. We know that we're spending more monthly. But the flip side is you're building that equity. So buying a house is debt, obviously, with the mortgage, but it's also an asset that can grow. So then net cost is around $50,000. So, long term, obviously, buying a house is, if you can afford it, definitely the way we would usually recommend going. But there's also other factors to consider. On the next page, I think, is where we'll kind of get into that. So whether you buy a house or rent is somewhat personal, and it can be financial. The biggest difference is, do you that building equity over time. If you're going to stay somewhere long term, you want to start doing that, and you want to buy if you can afford all the upfront costs. Flexibility. If you're not really sure if I want to live in Kansas City, if I'm settled here or some other city, if you want to move, obviously renting's better because selling a house is a lot more of a process than it is to just pick up and leave a lease. It's a lot quicker usually. You can do that. And then there are some tax benefits to buying a house. You can deduct the mortgage interest, which obviously you can't do with renting. The maintenance responsibility is a big one. I didn't even know how to mow a lawn. I don't think I've ever used a lawnmower before I bought a house because I had a dad and a brother who took care of that. So that was a big one for me, figuring out how to mow my lawn as a homeowner, compared to your landlord has people that will take care of that for you. And then, of course, appreciation potential with renting. You're not going to appreciate any assets since you don't own it, but a home value may increase over time, typically does increase over time. And then, yeah, as we mentioned, just upfront costs. It's obviously cheaper. You just have a security deposit for renting. And then buying, of course, is higher down payment, closing costs, insurance, taxes, all those things. And then the last major life milestone that we typically see, and I've personally lived in your 20s and 30s, is budgeting for a growing family. So this is my family here on the right. I've got a 2-year-old and a 16-month-old, and they are enthralled by this giraffe that we just fed, which is very cool, and I would recommend if you've never done that. But childcare costs is a huge, huge topic for people in my life stage, I would say. It's something we talk about more than you'd imagine. I personally pay $2,300 a month for daycare, so I'm on the higher end of that range there. But that's 2 kids, full time, 5 days a week in daycare. There are cheaper options. You can, of course, one parent staying at home is a cheaper option. You lose that income, but it could be cheaper long term if you do that. You could send your kids a couple days a week and their grandparents could watch them, a couple days a week if you have that ability. And then in-home daycares are typically cheaper than a facility. It just kind of depends on what you're looking for, what's going to work best for you and your family. Another big one is baby essentials. So this, people tell you it's expensive to have a kid, but I think until you're really in it and you're living it, you don't realize like how much those things add up because you've never bought diapers or formula before. So budgeting for that, I would say about $300 a month typically is the range, and that includes formula. So if you're breastfeeding, which I'm sure some of the men on this didn't expect to hear that word today, if you're breastfeeding, that's going to be free. But if it's, you're using formula, then obviously that's an expense you got to consider. And then clothing, the big one with clothing I would mention is babies grow out of clothes within 3 to 6 months. So I typically would recommend if you can get hand-me-downs from family, friends, even there's stores that sell clothes secondhand and they're almost like brand new because, like I said, kids just grow out of things so quickly. And then sometimes kids they skip a whole size because they just grew so fast. So if you can get those things a little cheaper or for free, that's a huge, huge benefit. You're still going to want to buy some cute clothes for, some new clothes for your baby. And I certainly have, but it's nice when you don't have to buy the entire wardrobe every 3 to 6 months, and it saves a lot of money. And then gear, you usually have a baby shower, so that can help with that. But typically, there's odds and ends that, over the months you kind of realize, oh, I need this or I need more of that. Parental leave, this is a factor, of course, if one parent decides to take, a leave like maternity leave, if it's unpaid. That's usually short term, so you can usually budget for that a little better. But this is more of an impact if someone decides to stay home. So if you or your partner decides, hey, long term, this makes more sense for us to stay home than pay daycare, or I want to stay home because I want to raise my kids. You can kind of decide what makes sense for you, but you'll have to factor in that lost income, just depending on your structure and who has what job and things like that. And then lastly, an emergency fund is always important for any stage of life you're in, but especially if you have a family, because now you have a little one to take care of. And I would aim for 3 to 6 months of expenses. I think a lot of times you hear 3 to 6 months of income, but really you want 3 to 6 months of expenses because you just want to make sure you can cover the bills, and you need food obviously to live, like the basic things you want to make sure you have covered. So I would look at it from an expense point of What do we spend over 3 to 6 months? Let's make sure we save enough for that. And then health insurance and benefits for families. You'll want to review coverage before having a kid to see kind of what their maternity and their delivery coverage is and what those costs might look like for you. Hospitals are pretty good about giving you estimates on those. And then a pediatrician, just understanding that as another expense you have to consider. It's another person to go to the doctor essentially. And they have a lot more doctor appointments than we do, of course, the first, 2 years. And then typically for health insurance premiums, so the premium that comes out of your paycheck, I would budget around $800 on average for a family. I think that's what I have for my family of four, and that's about the range. And then this is a big one if you've just had a kid, and they tell you this, but this is just something to keep in mind. There's a lot that comes at you when you have a baby. You're trying to figure out how to be a parent, and you're trying to keep this little baby alive. And all in between there, they give you 60 days to enroll your child in health insurance. So it's super important that you get your child on one of your healthcare insurances within 30 days of birth or adoption. This dependent care FSA stands for flexible spending account. That is great if you send your kids to daycare. You can save up to $5,000 per year pre-tax for daycare or preschool expenses. So that means you take money out each paycheck and it goes out pre-tax, so before you get taxed on that, and it goes into a separate fund, and then at the end of the year you get reimbursed essentially that $5,000 plus any growth, and that's money back in your pocket that you essentially just took out. You don't have to pay taxes on. So it's just a tax planning strategy, and if you do have daycare expenses, and your company offers it, it's definitely something to consider. And it's almost kind of a forced way to save too. If you have trouble saving, it's just take it out and don't have to think about it. And then you get $5,000 at the end of the year. Lastly, parental leave. You'll just want to understand, make sure you know what your employer's maternity leave policy is and their paternity leave policy. If you get 6 weeks paid, maternity, but you want to take 12 weeks, making sure you understand, okay, I've got 6 weeks that are unpaid. Are we okay to do that? Things like that. And then lastly, something to consider, usually people we have come to us when they start a family is they're like, hey, I want to start, I want to save for my child's education. How can I do that? So we just set up an illustration here of what if you start saving when your child's, just born, what that looks like for college. So we've got baby John here. He was just born. He's going to be 18 when he starts school, and we picked KU as a university. We're going to put in $200 a month, no current savings, and then we use 8% for our rate of return and then 5% for the cost of inflation. Normally inflation's like 2%, but with college, costs have just gone up dramatically, so we use 5%. So what this means is if you put $200 in monthly for 18 years, essentially on the right-hand side here, this dark blue column shows that the first 2 years of college for John would be fully funded for him to go to KU. And then those two lighter blue colors means that there'd be a shortfall. So he'd have to go get student loans or some sort of financial aid the last 2 years to college. And then the other thing at the bottom here, critical thing to look at is it even tells you the software we use, how much additional do I need to save if I want to fully fund college? And for this example, you just need to save an additional almost $200 a month. So instead of $200 monthly, you'd put in $400 monthly, and this would essentially fully fund John to go to KU for college. So that's something we do all the time for clients. And if college, planning is important to you, and making sure you invest for your child, that's something, the earlier, kind of like Sam said, the earlier you start, the better, because that compounded interest and growth over time is hugely beneficial. College is expensive, but it can be a lot, I don't want to say cheaper, but if you plan well, it can be a lot easier to pay for. And with that, I will pass it along. We're going to talk about debt and credit here with Jack.
Thanks so much. I appreciate it. I know we're getting close to the 1 p.m. mark here, and so I'll go relatively quickly, but great job, Sam and Susan. I was scribbling notes while you guys were talking, and Sam, I really like that phrase for 401ks, employer-sponsored IRA. It's a good reminder that they're a lot alike. They're essentially taxed the same, and it reminded me when I deal with clients in their 20s and 30s, what I see all the time is someone maybe who switched jobs 2 or 3 times, have 401ks with 2 or 3 previous employers. And this statistic is pretty crazy, but as of May 2023, an estimated $1.65 trillion in retirement savings is sitting in forgotten or left behind 401k accounts in the US. So don't be that person. Make sure to track down all of your old 401k accounts. You can roll those over and do an IRA with us here at InfiniTALKS. And Susan, I'm jealous. On that example, you ate my lunch. She saved $40,000 from 30 to 40. I saved 104,000 from 40 to 65, and she still beat me out. So, that really underscores, first of all, the power of compounding within investments and the importance of getting started early. But on my portion, what we're really going to focus on is your credit score, some tips to improve it, and some other information regarding loans and mortgages. So what really affects your credit score? I feel like people maybe know 1 or 2 of these things, probably not all 5, but they probably don't know the weightings. So I'm going to go in order of importance here. But at 35% payment history, this should come as no surprise, always trying to pay on time, right? For me, and we'll touch on this again in later slides, the easiest way is to put my credit cards on auto pay, right? So I don't have to think about it. It automatically comes out of my bank account each month, and I always pay on time. The second most important, and I actually feel like people probably don't know this as much, is credit utilization, keeping balances low. So let's just say you have a credit card with a limit of $10,000. It would behoove you to keep the credit card balance at $3,000 or less. That would look really good to credit rating agencies. So always being mindful of the amount of credit you have access to and how much you're actually using. That's really important. At 15% length of credit history, the older, the better. These credit rating bureaus, they want to see a long history of responsible use of credit, right? They want to say, okay, Jack Evans had a credit card back in 2015. He's been on time on all of his payments over this 10-year period, right? So even if you have an old credit card that maybe doesn't have a good reward system, keep it in your wallet. It'll help your credit score. At 10% credit mix. So lenders like to see, or credit rating bureaus like to see, a mix of different kinds of debt. And so, Jack has done a good job at managing a mortgage and an auto loan and paying off his credit cards, right? They like to see different types. That's not a recommendation from InfiniTALKS to go out there and get a loan tomorrow. But, as life changes and you need access to more credit, a variety helps. And lastly, new credit inquiries. Just don't do that too much. If you keep asking for credit limit increases over and over again, that will be looked at in a negative fashion. And so all of this culminates is that the reason that you want a good credit score is it'll give you access to more types of loans, to more types of debt, and at more preferential rates as well. So Sam, you can go to the next one. Awesome. So tips for building your credit early. And this is something that I wish that I had done as a kid. I assume pretty much everyone on this call has a credit card. So this will really probably be good advice, or at least some of it for your children. But become an authorized user on a trusted adult's credit card. I feel like that's something I should have done when I was a kid. I remember I first applied for a Southwest credit card and got denied just because I didn't have any credit history. And so I had to go to my Bank of America and get a credit card with a limit of like $1,000 just to get started before I ultimately got approved for my Southwest credit card. But that option's available to you. Open a secured credit card with a small deposit. Again, a lot of times you don't even really need the deposit. You'll just get a credit card with a very, very low credit limit just to get started. And credit utilization, just to touch on that again, even though I said on the previous slide that doing credit inquiries and trying to increase your credit limit over and over again is a bad thing, if you do it once or twice with the goal of saying, hey, I've got a credit card with $10,000 as its limit, I'm going to ask for 15, even though I don't need access to any more credit card debt, but it'll make my utilization look better, right? So $3,000 divided by 10, if that goes up to 15,000, that will give you a better credit utilization rate. And again, keeping older accounts open to help lengthen your credit history, always a good thing. So Sam, if you want to take it to the next one. using credit cards wisely. So pretty much all of the text there is a reiteration of things I've already said. But one thing is to always know how your points system is set up, right? I've got one credit card that's just a certain amount of points for every transaction I make. But on my Southwest credit card, I get 3 times points for Southwest purchases. I get 2 times points for certain expenses like Uber or some streaming platforms like Max or Amazon Prime, stuff like that. And then 1 times points on other things. And so, I always like to put all of my like utilities and streaming expenses on my credit card just because it automatically builds up the points. I auto pay it off each month. But sometimes when I have a large expense coming up, I'll pay it with a credit card and then turn around and pay it right off on my phone. And so I'm pocketing the points, I'm immediately paying off the debt, and I'm still maintaining a healthy credit score. Awesome. So switching to student loans. There are federal and there are private student loans. And what's really going to, on the next slide, going to be the main part of the conversation is how the federal loans can be paid off. But a federal loan offers an income-driven repayment plan, and that can be really effective for young graduates who don't have a ton of money yet and really need to manage their monthly cash flow. And I'll explain that in a little bit more detail. And then also for students or graduates who are looking to work in the public sector, you will be eligible for public service loan forgiveness as well. So an advantage to a federal loan if you are looking to get into that space. But Sam, will you move on to the next slide, please? But repayment and forgiveness. And so there are basically 3 repayment plans for student loan debt. There's standard, graduated, and income driven. No one way to repay is right or wrong. It depends on your situation and what's right for you. And so a standard plan, that's going to be for somebody who has high and very stable income, and their goal is ultimately to be debt-free quickly. So the way that that's set up is a very standard loan repayment system. You have a fixed payment where it's a certain amount of interest, it's a certain amount of principal over a 10-year period. And so, a good example was I just had a friend graduate from an MBA program. He had to take out a sizable loan to be able to pay his way through college, but he stepped into this wonderful consulting job, very high salary. And so he's got an extremely high level of confidence that his current income level is going to be sustainable for the next 10 plus years. So he'd be a really good candidate for a standard loan because he can pay off his debt quickly. He can minimize the amount of interest he's paying. And he can do it while managing his monthly cash flow as well. A graduated repayment schedule, on the other hand, it starts low and increases over time. And that's going to be more interest than you would get on a standard repayment plan. So who is somebody that would be a good fit for a graduated repayment schedule? Well, it'd be someone who has a high degree of confidence that they don't maybe have a lot of money now, but it's going to increase over a certain window, let's just say 10 years. So maybe it's, a young accountant who's just getting started out doing tax or audit. They're not making a ton of money yet, but they've got this really clear path to become controller or CFO within the next 10 years, right? They might be somebody that's a good candidate for a graduated repayment schedule. So we're going to start out low today. My payments for my loan are going to increase over time, but I'm confident that my income is at least going to grow commensurately with that increase. And the last one and the most niche of the 3 is an income-driven repayment plan. So as the name would suggest, this is how this loan you pay off as a percentage of your income each month. And so this will give you the most flexibility from a monthly cash flow standpoint. And it's for somebody who really is unsure what their income levels are going to be over the next 10 years. Maybe they still want some lateral career movement, or they just aren't sure what they're going to be compensated. And so in the years that your income increases, you're going to pay more, but it's still going to be a percentage of your income. In the years that maybe your income decreases, you're going to be paying less to pay off your loan. And so the windows for these types of loans are 20 to 25 years with the potential for forgiveness of the remainder of the loan balance if you haven't paid it off over that 20 or 25-year window. And so I've seen maybe some young people who just graduated medical school, use an income-driven repayment plan. They're a resident, they're working crazy hours, they're not getting paid a ton yet, and so that income-driven plan works well for them. And then, as they become attending doctors, their income increases, and the amount that they pay off on their loan increases commensurately as well. And the last thing, these forgiveness programs for somebody who is looking to get into the public sector, you might be eligible for loan forgiveness as well. Should you refinance? And first of all, just to define what refinancing is, it is essentially replacing one existing loan with a new one with the intent of getting a new rate or term for that loan. And so this is kind of talking about, and this slide is in the context of student loans, but I'll tie in home ownership and mortgages as well. So refinancing is good. If you have good credit, you earn stable income. You saw a lot of home refinancings in 20 and 2021 because at that time rates were basically at zero. There were plenty of people out there who had a pre-existing mortgage rate that was higher than what they could get in the marketplace. And so they said, okay, I'm going to get a new mortgage at this lower rate. And it worked out very well for them. They're paying less in interest costs now. In 2022, of course, interest rates shot straight up. And so there's a lot of people out there who have 2, 3, 4% mortgage rates right now because of that good refinancing in 2020 and 2021, where now if you want to get a new mortgage, it's at 7%. And so that's a good opportunity to refinance. But in the context of student loans, you shouldn't refinance if you're pursuing loan forgiveness or if you're using an income-driven repayment plan. The reason for that is when you refinance with a private lender, you permanently forfeit the income-driven repayment option and the loan forgiveness if you have a federal student loan. So you should not refinance if you fall within that category. And also, if you don't have an emergency savings in place, that's priority number one. Get the emergency savings going before you think about refinancing an outstanding loan. Auto loans, lease or buy. And this is going to rhyme a lot with what Susan said on renting or buying a home. When you lease a car, you're going to have lower monthly payments, but you don't own the vehicle, right? It's somebody else's asset. And so, there's a little bit of anxiety that might be involved in that as well. Can't ding up the car, got to make sure it's shiny, no scratches, that type of thing. In terms of buying a car, you can use cash or you can finance with an auto loan to own that car. And the idea that is somewhat similar to owning a home is you build ownership and equity within the car as an owner. The thing that separates out home ownership and having a car is you expect the equity or the home value. When you're a homeowner, you expect your home to increase in value over time. Whereas when you're a car owner, it's decreasing in value over time. So the equity that you're building is not as lucrative as it would be if you were a homeowner. Go to the next slide. So this is the last slide on my portion, but there are two methods that I think apply when you're trying to repay loans, and there's the snowball and the avalanche method. So for snowball, this is the one that makes mathematically the most sense. It's a method where you look at all of your outstanding debt, you find the highest rate, and you try to pay that off first, right? Let's get all of the high interest debt that I have off the books. I want to pay that off early and then focus on my less costly debt. The other approach would be an avalanche, where you pay up the smallest balances first to build momentum and motivation. So sometimes people are just completely overwhelmed with the types of debt that they own and what percentages. And so they'll just look at the smallest one and say, I need a win. Let's get this paid off in a year or two, get it out of my mind. And then I can just focus on the other 2 or 3 loans that I have outstanding. And so in the table example, the person that has these 3 types of debt, what they're doing is the snowball method here. And so you can see debt 1 has an outstanding balance of $1,200, debt 2 at $500, and debt 3 at $2,500. And the highest interest rate is at debt 1 at 20%. And so, of course, satisfying the minimum payments for each debt, but then doing a little extra, that $30 each month to try to retire that debt first, since it's the highest rate. So that investor is going about it from a mathematical standpoint. If you're somebody who's really just overwhelmed and exhausted, the avalanche is probably a better fit for you. You can go to the next slide. Oh, we got one more. So two options that you have available to you are debt consolidation. So combining all of your loans into one, which, may lower your interest rate, but watch out for fees and longer payoff periods. And then something that people may not know about is transferring balances between credit cards. So if you've got 2 or 3 credit cards, you don't have a balance on, or you have a balance on 2 of them, you don't have a balance on one, maybe look into transferring the balance from the other 2 into the one card without a balance. A lot of times, the credit card issuing company will allow you to transfer a balance in and not pay interest on that balance for a 12 or 24-month window. So something that's available to you to mitigate your interest costs. And that wraps it up for today. And so I don't think we have enough time for questions, but a big thank you to Sam and to Susan and to Lauren, our marketing director, for getting this all done today. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us at info@infinitalksk.com or call us at 913-563-7300. Thanks so much for being out here today, and we're all ears. If you guys have any questions on credit, health, how to build a budget, or good long-term investing habits, feel free to reach out. Thank you.
Thanks everybody for joining. We appreciate it.
Thank you.